I was thinking about this when the Thundering affix was announced, and the whole topic of like kiss versus curse was being discussed. And I think a lot of people are really quick to criticize, but I'm not really sure many people have actual solutions to these problems that really make sense. So I thought this would be a fun little video to make. I want to make a video on what the game could be like if every single affix was kiss or curse, and more specifically, what I mean by that is every single affix that currently is one that only has a detriment to it, like makes the content harder and have like a little barrier to jump over. If one of those affixes also always had something that you gained in terms of power as well. Now, I wanted to make this video for like 2 weeks, but when I first started thinking about this, I was thinking about them all in the way that the Dreadlords currently give you power, right? But now that I've been thinking about them in just like a flat amount of damage, I think it's a lot easier. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. You don't have to come up with one for every single affix, but I think it'd be really cool to see creative things. And yeah, it's just cool to talk about stuff like this. You never really get to talk about stuff like this. So I have this spreadsheet here, big played out one slash routes, is where should be keeping my routes if I was keeping up on that. But anyway, we have the actual affixes listed in the week. So we'll just go through it. But yeah, so let's just go ahead and start with sanguine because this is the one that I think actually probably needs it the most, to be honest. And again, they probably aren't going to do any of this stuff, but sanguine is one that I do think has become really unfair at times. In Legion, it was like really an affix that didn't really do anything because all the dungeons in Legion were really large, wide dungeons. There's really only one or two situations where sanguine would ever cause issues. I remember in Blackrock Cold a lot, but everybody was playing Blood DK. It was like a lot more open, I felt like, this the affix. And then in BFA and Shadowlands and probably again in Dragonflight, this affix is going to really complicate things because there's going to be a lot of cramped, really small dungeons. And on top of the current affix that, the Thundering concept that they're displaying, yeah, this one's going to be a bad one again. So this one's easy for me. Sanguine is very easy for me. I think it should also heal you or potentially buff you in some way if you stand in it. So what I mean is like, right now when you stand in sanguine, it does damage to you, okay? It heals the enemies, but it also does damage to you. It doesn't heal you or do anything positive for you, but it does to the enemy. So I always thought it'd be very cool if you stand in sanguine, you would get some kind of buff from it. It's like the quintessential one that I think could work and it could be really powerful. So, yeah, I think this one it'd be very interesting as well because the mobs would still get healed if they stood in it, right? So you'd have to be very careful about your positioning and where you're standing, or just not be the tank and let the healers or the DPS and stuff do it. But yeah, I think it would have to. I don't think healing you would make a lot of sense. But it's just such a cool thing because, Blood DK, like Sanguine could really just be a Blood DK spell, right? So that one's pretty obvious. How about Grievous? The next one would be Grievous, and this one's actually a lot harder. I can't really come up with a great one for this. But I would say, like, the thing about Grievous is that the longer it's on you, the worse it gets. So I would like to see something like that where the lower health you are, or the longer it's on you, or maybe the more stacks you have, you get like a small like damage, or your attacks have a chance to apply a bleed or something like that. And it's funny because we talked about this on stream the other day, and people were pointing out that like in season 2, there was these the anima powers from killing like Sogadon and stuff. Well, they were giving you affixes as actual powers, so it's like almost like they're thinking about some of that stuff, and yeah, you can almost just apply that to you. So maybe instead that like the thing is, I don't want to just say like I also apply Grievous to the enemies because that would be really overpowered. But yeah, something like that. Like when you have 4 stacks of Grievous or whatever the cap is now, I think it's 4. You can also apply a bleed to the enemy or something like that. I don't know, just something that would make it so it's not as, oh my god, get that off, get that off, get that off, get that off. You know what I mean? But you have to balance it because if it's like, oh, don't get it off, don't get it off, don't get it off, then it's also not really fun, right? Next up would be bolstering, and this one we, like I said, we talked about and we kind of already saw. I think it would be a pretty good one. Whenever an enemy or an ally dies, you also get a buff. And I don't really know how you would play it because, yeah, it would be kind of strange. But I think it would be a good idea to just have as part of the dungeon because bolstering is still pretty overpowered. It'll never not be overpowered. It's been nerfed dramatically, but it's still, it's still the one of the most time intensive affixes, if not the, I think it probably is the most in time intensive affix, no matter what. And it's always just seemed a little unfair. You know what I mean? Like, why should these health pools be going up? I never really understood that. But I think it was because they wanted to differentiate it from raging. So yeah, I don't know. But yeah, I like that concept. Whenever an ally dies, you get a buff. And it doesn't have to be permanent, but I think it should stay in each combat. So if somebody dies on a boss, then the buff that the allies should get should just be lasting for the rest of the boss. And then whenever combat drops, it should be removed. Now, explosive is another one that I really, really have a cool concept for. I think explosive would be a really fun one to have. Whenever you kill an explosive, it does damage to the enemies. And we were talking about this the other day. I think this would be my favorite one. I already really like explosive. It's kind of really fun to be like really accurately targeting things and killing them, especially with like only one auto attack. It's a lot more fun than it used to be as well. So I really like explosive. It's probably my favorite actual fix, and I would love to see that whenever you dealt damage to explosive, that damage exploded to everybody around. You know, like how if it goes off, if we don't kill it, it does damage to us. Well, how about if we kill it, it does damage to enemies? And I think this would solve the biggest issue with explosive, that there is a really big penalty for pulling really large. Like if you pull really, really, really big on explosive, you're done. Like you can't kill the explosives fast enough. So it's going to be a really good solution to that. You would pull super large, and that would actually be a benefit. You would want to pull as big as possible, and then you would just be focused on killing the explosives, and the pack would get killed by accident. Like that, it's I love the concept. I really do. Now, busting is not one I really thought too much about. So, when the enemies die, it applies a bleed to you. And you could say the same thing like we said with bolstering. When you die, you apply a dot to the enemy, but that's not really going to work. I don't feel like it's not. The thing about busting is like it's got to be frequent enough for it to really matter. So I just think that debuff should probably do something to you instead of just damage. I think that would be pretty cool. Like you could also maybe like radiate with energy or something like that. When you get the busting stacks, your character could physically bust. You know what I mean? Like it could be like almost like Hellfire from back in the day on Warlock or something like that. Like you're taking damage, but you're also kind of radiating out damage. And maybe they could even make that damage deal more damage to allies or something like that. I don't know, but yeah, I think that would be kind of cool. It wouldn't really be very good though. That's not a great one. I don't feel like this one works really well because once the pack's all dead, what are you doing damage to? But it would be cool because then you'd be able to drag in enemies, trash to bosses and stuff like that. I think that would be interesting. Now, storming and volcanic, these are two that I think I don't have great solutions to, but I kind of like the concept. Okay. So these ones just basically kind of spawn things in the world that you're supposed to avoid, storming especially. And I think the solution here is to make that a soakable thing, and then you get a buff for it. And my concept would be actually kind of, yeah, we talked about this, the shock bots. Okay, the zap buff from Junkyard. It's so powerful, and it's so honestly kind of becoming quite iconic. Like it's becoming a very noticeable for how much it's impacting this dungeon. I'd love to see that. Let's continue that. You know what I mean? People were actually suggesting this exact same thing for the thundering affix. You soak the puddle instead of dodge the puddle, and then you get a buff for it. And I would love to see that with either, really. But storming, I think, is right now the topic, so we're gonna go with that one. Soak that tornado. I would just love to see the shock bot electricity shooting around. You know what I mean? I think that'd be pretty cool. But I would also love to see like Wind Fury. You know what I mean? Like when you soak a storming, you get a Wind Fury proc. You start auto attacking more or something like that. I don't know how you would do it for casters though. But and then same thing with volcanic. When you get volcanic, you can just soak it, and you'll get the volcanic buff that we got from season 2, which was actually really, 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 really like popular. It was like insanely valuable too. The volcanic affix in season 2, like for us to get from Sogadon and stuff, it was knocking up mobs constantly. Volcanic plumage, it was called, and it was really, really, really valuable. So that's just where you do it. You just add that. You soak a volcano. You still take the damage, the kiss and the curse. You get the curse, but then you get the kiss, which is really rare for a lot of us. And then so you get the buff, and it knocks people up and lasts for, say, like 15 seconds or something like that. And if you do it well, it could be really useful. So, and raging is another one that I'm pretty sure there was like a raging one from them as well, but I never really. I think it was just don't really know how it worked, but yeah. So raging, I think the solution to raging is when you purge it, you get a buff. I think that would be the solution. which would be a little bit imbalanced. So I think they need to make it so it's also a magic as well. I don't think that's possible, but if that was possible, I think that would be better because obviously only a few classes can soothe it. But right now, it's like really, yeah, it's very one-dimensional, this affix, so there's not really a lot of things you can do with it. You could try to make it so like when your character drops low, but then people would just like game the hell out of that, right? Like people did that in Dark Souls. I always thought that was funny. Like you see like Dark Souls speed running, like people running around with like 5 health. You know what I mean? So it's like I never really liked the look of that. That doesn't look like the game to me, and I wouldn't like to see that in Mythic Plus. But it would be kind of interesting if that did happen. But if that did happen, it would completely imbalance the week. So I do think the better option is just so when you soothe raging, you get a little buff yourself, and I don't know what you could call it, but kind of like like you're empowered by soothing the rage, and you now do more damage or something like that. So, or even like it could be something that just like does. This would be better. This would be better. How about an aura instead of a buff? Like for just you give a buff to everybody. So it's like inspire. Like well, that might be a better solution for later, but I don't know, something like that, like an aura that gives you and your party a little bit of damage every time you clear a raging stack. Because right now it's very obvious that there's a couple imbalance. This affix is really, I feel like in an imbalanced state, and especially if you don't have classes that can soothe it, it's really. I don't feel like it's bad. The cost benefit ratio of it being in the game is not really working out for me. So. Okay, the next one would be inspiring, and yeah, I was just kind of thinking about that too, but I don't know. I think inspiring is a very interesting concept, and I wouldn't be opposed to something like this, where once you, once you kill the inspired mob, you loot a buff from it or something like that. Like you kill it, and then it drops some like yellow soul on the ground that you can run around and pick up for some kind of buff. Something like we just talked about with raging, maybe where it's like an aura that gives your party a benefit. You would think like maybe a benefit that prevents casting lockout. See, I don't know if like we want to. That's not going to work, obviously. So I don't know if we want to try to lean into exactly what the affix is. Like, do we want to make inspiring a caster benefit only? And do we want to make like busting like a melee benefit only or something like this? Like I don't really know if that's healthy for the game. But I have this thing in my head where like inspiring could be like a haste buff to casting speed or something like that. Something related to casting, because that's exactly like that's all it does really. But I don't know. Yeah, just the actual immunity to stuns and stuff that wouldn't really ever benefit anybody. So definitely some kind of buff that you can loot, I think. Now Spiteful is another great one. I think this one would be really really fun to basically give you some buff for every time you kill one of these. It's very interesting because there's so many of them. It's similar like explosive where you're gonna kill a lot of these, and the health pool really adds up over the course of the dungeon. This affix is kind of like sneakily one of the harder affixes in the game because you're spending so much extra time in combat on these mobs that it really does add up over the time. So yeah, I think this would be a really good one to give you some kind of buff. But I think a more thematic one that was discussed when we were talking about this on stream was whenever you kill one, you gain a movement speed buff, and I could even see that being taken further and further, like a stacking movement speed buff. So you kill, 5, 6, 7 of them, and you're moving fast. Like I'm talking fast. Is it beneficial enough though? Probably not. But I think you'd be surprised because even in a season 3, a lot of people were taking that woe relic and they didn't even really need to skip anything. So just running around dungeons at times can be really, you gain a lot of time. So I think this would be kind of cool because then, you could even potentially try to keep enemies alive for bosses and try to get a benefit out of that somehow. But yeah, I think movement speed is a good choice. It kind of like it's like unique enough that the other ones wouldn't really the problem you want to solve here is not like the exact same buff from every single affix, but I like that a lot, and I think that's it. We also have Necrotic, which is being removed. So is inspiring, by the way. I should have mentioned that, but yeah, Necrotic being removed, and I think Necrotic would be the easiest one to me because right now the tank is really, really, really unfairly burdened by this affix. Nobody else will ever deal with it, and even the DPS especially can help with it, but they never really do. So I think what this solution should be is simply just gives you a damage buff. The more stacks you have, You take 1% less healing, you also do 1% more damage. And so you got 99 stacks of necrotic, you do 99% more damage. And maybe that's overpowered, and there'd probably be really easy ways to exploit it. But I think if you're gonna be generous with one of these buffs, it's got to be that one, because that's, in my opinion, the most unfair buff season after season in multiple expansions. The tank's job is already incredibly difficult, and their only real job is to survive. The way I've always thought of it is like, imagine if there was a buff that made you just do less damage stacking up as DPS. Everybody would hate it. DPS would never want to play, and everybody would be like, "Oh, it's not even an affix low. It's just so easy." You know what I mean? But it's the reality of it. It's just not fun to deal with, and it's never been fun, and it's just counterproductive to what tanking is. So you're supposed to get meleeed. That's the job. So that was how this all started, because I was like, necrotic, super easy one. This should definitely be a kiss curse. No way it should stay like it is, and they're just removing it. So I don't know. Let me think. Let me know what your thoughts, guys. If you have any fun little thoughts on this, I'd love to just hear some other ideas, or even just for new affixes in general, even for the thundering affix, anything that's coming. You might have some cool concepts on, because I think the game's creativity, it's people always, like I say, always try to be like negative about stuff, and they say the game isn't doing something that could be interesting. But I don't really hear a lot of people actually offer like real solutions that are actually like balanced. I'm trying to think like what the game would look like if it had this, not like what my overpowered broken version of the game would be. So let me know what your thoughts are. I hope you enjoyed this video. We'll see you guys soon.